Hello, I am Valerie Worthington, and this is the latest in a series of conversations I'm getting to have with my colleagues and friends in Jiu-Jitsu who also do other interesting things. And today I get to talk with Betsy O'Donnell and Chris Amico about journalism, the media, how we're getting the information that we're getting about COVID-19 and other things. And I asked them if they would be willing to share their expertise in evaluating media sources, their experience in being in the media and all that good stuff. So Betsy and Chris, thanks so much for being here. The first question that I have for you, and you can decide who answers first, can you tell me a little bit about your Jiu-Jitsu background and experience, and then how you're currently involved in Jiu-Jitsu, minus the quarantine, of course?
Chris started first, so I vote for you.
Fair. Though not by much, and technically it was your husband who got me into it, so there's that. So I had trained in a lot of martial arts over my life. My parents put me in karate when I was a kid, and then in college, somebody in the in 2001, somebody was like, "You should try this thing called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu," and I was like, "That sounds weird." And I saw they sent me videos of Hickson and Pride, and I think I went and found UFC 1, as everyone does. And then for reasons I cannot explain, I went and decided to spend 4 years training very traditional Okinawan karate and ignoring jiu-jitsu, except to know what it was and occasionally go to open mats and get beat up. Many years later, after doing that and Kempo and a little judo, my son was born 4.5 years ago, and I said, I need to actually get some exercise in a way that I'm going to go to. And I've been meaning to try Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a long, long time. And around that time, Betsy said, "Hey, I'm dating this guy," or I don't know if you were even dating then,
Yeah.
and he's really into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You two should talk. And Jeff helped me sort of make that leap. So that is the origin story. So that was 4.5 years ago, fall of 2015. And so I'm now a purple belt under Roberto Maya. Just got my purple belt in October. Had my second child with me to do it. So somewhere there's a picture of me holding a child, getting a purple belt, or handing off a child, getting a purple belt.
That was a really big.
Oh, I lost
That was
you
a
right
big
there.
year.
It was a
New
big,
baby,
yeah.
new.
Yes.
Absolutely, a big year.
Yeah, so I'm a purple belt under Roberto Maya at Boston BJJ. Whenever we are back to training.
How about you, Betsy?
Jeff also got me into jiu-jitsu. I was really a slow adopter, and I think of not just this call, but anytime I'm in a conversation with jiu-jitsu people, I am always the hobbyist in the room, which is something I feel like people need to say because, are you guys having problems hearing me? Okay.
No, I'm also the hobbyist who has never competed, and I'm happy if I can train twice a week.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I had two major life events that started my jiu-jitsu. Jeff and I had been friends forever. So I'm married to Jeff Shaw. He's a black belt under Seth Shamp, who's trains under, he does Gracie Jiu-Jitsu basically. And I train with Dave Porter, who's under Pedro Sauer. And I had been friends with Jeff forever. We had started to have a lot more conversations, in part because we were both single and kind of like, hey, you seem great, but also just because suddenly we had all this time, and nearly simultaneous to that, I was mugged at gunpoint in Boston. And the mugging was not actually that scary. It was just infuriating. And at the time, it just made me really aware, the guy never laid a hand on me. It was very businesslike. Here's my wallet, here's my phone, please have a nice night, off we go. But I realized I had zero plan for if that guy wanted to move me around, right? I had, for a joke, because there was a coupon, done a month of Krav Maga at one point. So I started training kind of both because I felt like it was an aspect of my personal safety that I had really neglected. Like I have no aspirations to be a world beater, but I should have an answer if somebody puts a hand on me, right? And I just didn't. And the other was, you know, Jeff, and I think most people who know my husband have had this experience. Through Jeff, I met a lot of amazing people who trained jiu-jitsu. And for me, I got seduced by the community more than the art, right? Some people get on the mats, as you guys know, and are just like, this is amazing. I want to wrestle around. I love getting my ass kicked. For me, it was very much like, look at that badass woman. Wow, Shayla too can do a flying armbar. Like, just Kim Rice is incredible, and just having fun. And then off the mats, these people were so healthy and so happy and so balanced in their approach to their lives. And I wanted to be closer to it. So I'm a blue belt. I'm probably a perma blue belt, and I am very good with that. And I will say that the same way I say I'm a hobbyist, because I think there's got to be room, especially now. Jeff and Dave and I opened a jiu-jitsu academy exactly a year ago. And one of the things that we're so happy. It was a weird first anniversary, but I sent out an email to everybody in the academy the other day, because the community is really what's keeping everybody together through this, you know. And I've gotten the privilege of like going around a lot of different places and training, not nearly as many as you, Val. But you can really tell a lot about the training by the culture around the training, I think. And so that's kind of where we're at with jiu-jitsu. I badly jacked up my knee. I have no ACL left and half a meniscus right at the end of my white belt career. I got a blue belt, but my training ever since has been spotty. So if I get on the mats these days, it's actually a pretty rare occasion. I'm doing more yoga than jiu-jitsu. But again, like Chrissy Lindsay, who runs US Grappling, is actually a role model of mine. Chrissy gets on the mats when she feels happy about it. She gets on the mats when she's excited about it, but she recognizes the value of creating jiu-jitsu spaces for everybody, and that's where I'm at too.
So that's actually a perfect segue, because I had the opportunity to chat with Chrissy a couple of days ago about the fact that she works for a company that's providing technological infrastructure for those of us who are now working from home, et cetera, et cetera. And the Dunning-Kruger effect was in full force, because I was having trouble hearing her, and I offered her some tech suggestions. And then I realized what I had done. And now I run the risk of being in the same situation, because the two of you combined and independently of each other have so much media experience. And that's what we're here to talk about, in addition to jiu-jitsu. So I would love it if both of you would talk a little bit about your media background, and I'll be quiet while you do that. But the idea here is that you have expertise in a lot of areas in the media and journalism, and people like me who are end users could really use some insight into how to evaluate what it is that we're reading, so that we know that we're getting the clearest picture we possibly can. So Betsy or Chris, whichever one of you would like to go.
I mean, technically, I've been doing the journalism longer. So.
I wasn't going to call that.
I like this way of deciding. Whoever's been doing it longer, that's good.
So I was totally an accidental journalist. I grew up in Marine Corps families. I was educated in Department of Defense schools in North Carolina and Japan, which was really a huge advantage, because one thing that I was thinking about a lot this week is DoD schools, because they're managed at the federal level, aren't local political footballs. So that means a lot of things that we were taught. One, they pay really well, so we had a high standard of education because a lot of our instructors had doctorates. But also there was not a lot of like infighting about how do we teach about civil rights, for example, or because it was just sort of delivered from a best practices point of view. And I say that just to say, I came into journalism without any journalism training. I had taken one copy editing class in college, kind of by accident, because my best friend was taking it. And I fell in love with this book, actually. We're at my teaching desk right now. So the Associated Press style book. is like, the front half is basically a dictionary that nobody that I teach enjoys reading. But the part I fell in love with is this very on point thing that we're talking about today. So it's the Associated Press Statement of News Values. And this is like jam-packed with the question of why journalists do what they do. Because one of the things, I'm teaching an ethics class this quarter, one of the things we have to balance in journalism that is what seduced me into doing it professionally is very rarely in professional journalism, which I want to make distinct from media, because media includes Hollywood and every podcast in the world, but professional journalism or high quality community journalism is generally balancing right decisions against right decisions, right? Important values against other important values. It's not good versus evil. So we're talking about things like bringing to our communities, are we more interested in justice or mercy, or justice or rehabilitation when we're talking about incarceration? And we make decisions that way too. So that kind of like complexity and the amount of incredibly thoughtful decision making that the book revealed to me, I was like, these people are doing really cool work. It's a civil service, which I was raised to believe is the highest good a person can do, is what have you done for your community lately? You know, I was raised among people who will literally hop on grenades for one another, and that has an effect. So my dad really discouraged me from going to the Marine Corps for temperament reasons. But journalism was the next closest good that I could kind of come to where I felt like I could do a real service to society. So I've been doing it 23 years now. I mostly worked in tiny community. This is going on a lot longer than I meant, but to qualify me as like, I know what I'm talking about. I worked in community newsrooms for 15 years at the local level across the South and the Midwest. One of my superpowers, because of where I grew up, is translating conservative to liberal and vice versa, which is always a really hard thing for communities to do. And then I was in North Carolina working as the editorial page editor at one of kind of the older storied papers in the state, and got a fellowship where I met Chris at the Nieman Foundation at Harvard. So Chris, his amazing wife, Laura, Chris and Laura started a very cool media company together.
I'm married to a journalist, so that's my extra credential.
And really close friends because we had a very similar approach toward respecting the community you're in, not talking down to people, and understanding, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but understanding deeply that journalism is not really a profession, right? We don't have a qualifying board. There's not a licensing exam. You don't have superpowers. The thing that distinguishes professional journalists from AMs is a set of standards and practices that are really rigorous around vetting information, and it's a discipline of verification. So, so we saw really eye to eye on that. Had an amazing time like talking with all of these brilliant other journalists, Pulitzer winners, and people who were like coming up with crazy projects in West Africa, and just amazing people. And then we dispersed back to our home communities. And now I teach journalism in Bellingham, Washington, which Jeff called Diet Canada. We're 15, 20 minutes from the border. And I help run the student newspaper there, which is another, our local paper is dying. It belongs to a hedge fund now, it's up for sale. So the student paper is really the only newspaper in town, which creates some real urgency for me. And that was a lot. Chris, your turn.
Oh, wow. All right, so I'll try and keep this under 2 minutes. So I started practicing journalism in college. I came out of student government and activism, and I was leaving that, and I was like, what do I do next? And the editor of the student newspaper said, come with me. And I happened to know my way really well around the UC, the University of California system, because I've been working in various kinds of student activism around that for 2 years. And And so he said, come work on the campus desk and then report on stuff. And that sort of got me into it. And it was just a way to sort of apply that knowledge and take that same sort of, I just sort of dove into things. And like Betsy, I spent a lot of time working on local news. I've sort of bounced around a lot. I think, worked in every kind of media there is at this point, or at least I've worked for companies that do every kind of media. Yeah, newspapers. I was in public media for about a decade. So yeah, I was worked for PBS NewsHour, worked for NPR, worked for WBUR, which is one of the local stations out here. Worked for Frontline at WGBH, which is the rival public station to WBUR. I'm now working for Gannett, which owns, after the last merger, 260 newspapers around the country. Flagship of which is USA Today, but it goes all the way down to the Kitsap Sun in Washington, NorthJersey.com, and Ashbury Park Press, and a bunch of others in New Jersey. The Arizona Republic, the Cincinnati Enquirer. I can't name them all because there are 260 of them. I got used to saying there were 110, and now there are 260. I have a sort of weird job in journalism, which I love, where I actually mostly build software now. I started off as a reporter, and then through a hilarious series of events that found me in China for a while, and then sitting in a room in Seoul, South Korea with no money, I started learning programming, and now I mostly do that. So I work on a team that creates unique storytelling experiences for local newspapers around the country, as well as USA Today. And we do everything from maintain a storytelling framework for sort of big magazine style custom experiences, and then we build bespoke things. And in the course of that, we also sort of consult on just how to tell stories better. I think that's everything in a nutshell, but I've probably missed a few things. I'm also, like Betsy said, married to a journalist who is amazing and better at this than I am. And so we talk about this a lot. Yeah, that's my credentials.
I would argue that you're both very qualified. There's so much, just based on the experiences that you've had, there's so much that we could cover. One of the things that comes to mind for me immediately, though, is particularly tensions are high because of what we're experiencing right now in the world. What would you say to an end reader about how to evaluate what they're reading and how to explain the fact that you do have some media that skews more liberal and some that skews more conservative, or that's how people perceive it? So I'm an end reader. I want to know what's going on in the world, or an end user. What are some things that you do to make sure that you're providing the most accurate information, and then when you're on the consuming end, to make sure that you are understanding clearly and getting the most accurate information?
Chris, you want to go first, or shall I?
I'll go first, just because I think I've been thinking about what advice to give people, because this is a hard story, and I think that's actually my first advice is we should acknowledge the difficulty of the problem with this story in particular. And I was thinking about I've talked to friends who, about how, like, earlier this year we were like, man, the election, that is going to be the story of the year, and then it was like impeachment got dropped in our laps, and it was like, oh wow, that just blew up everything, and that's going to throw off our whole year. And at least we get the Olympics in the middle of the year to, like, take a break and be like, let's do a big fun international story. And this has just blown everything out. This just with COVID stuff. Yeah, like coronavirus is just a hard story that is completely unavoidable, and that is a different thing than anything else I've ever covered or experienced, frankly. And I think that's sort of my first advice to everybody is acknowledge the difficulty of the problem, that it's not just that journalists are working tirelessly and always playing catch up. It's that so are scientists, so are politicians, so are doctors. Like it's everybody, everybody in the medical system, everybody in government, everybody in the media is playing catch up on this, and nobody has the complete picture. And that is just hard. Like there's uncertainty on top of uncertainty built into this. And so, yeah, my first advice is acknowledge the difficulty of the problem and understand that things that seem true today might change tomorrow. So that's my first piece of advice. And then I think the other thing is like just evaluating, take it slow. Evaluating information is it's a skill that we all need to work on. If you're not sure, if you don't trust something, check the sources and check other sources, like compare notes, talk to people. But it's a hard problem. And now I'll kick it over to Betsy.
I agree as ever. I agree with everything Chris said, although I would modify the last thing you said, which is if you don't agree with something, check the sources. If you do agree with something, check the sources, right? So I'm going to go back to the thing that distinguishes journalists from other people when they're talking is journalists, our discipline is entirely about verifying information, right? This is why journalism is expensive and it's super time consuming. Because how many of us, when we're clicking to share the Facebook post, have time to do, realistically, many people, the data is super clear, go ahead and just share stuff without reading it, right? The headline looks great. Gonna share that. That supports my ethos, my point of view, what I want to put out in the world. How many of us actually not only click through to read the piece before we share it, but then click through to see, for example, if there's a story about a new scientific study, click through to see the actual study. Was it peer reviewed? Are the people who published it actually experts in this field, or are they, for example, do they have a PhD in English literature but are pretending to be epidemiologists and calling themselves doctor, right? Which happens. So one of the things, because I have this like opportunity to teach, I get to both practice journalism, but it's much more valuable to me right now that I get to teach it, because I'm working with 18 to 25-year-olds who have full rights as adult human beings in America. Every single adult in this country could start up a media enterprise. You are legally entitled to do so if you can find a distribution platform, which is super easy because Twitter exists. So what's the distinction? I talk to my students a lot about skepticism 101. Like their job, there's an old saying in journalism, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. And what that means is take nothing for granted, especially your own biases and the things that you want to believe. So because I work with young people who tend to be much more politically active, but also lacking in experience in sort of weighing information or understanding how to evaluate information, we spend a lot of time on this. So the important questions I would tell them, and I would tell anyone, are ask yourself, how do I know this is true? Right? And you have to be rigorous with yourself, or else you are at risk of polluting the information ecosystem, right? It is just as bad to put lies out on social media as it is to pour pure peanut oil into your local creek. Probably worse, because people don't vote about, like fish don't vote, people do. So I would say, 1, ask yourself how you know this is true. 2, if you have any doubts, especially if you like it a little bit too much, pause and consider it much more intensively. And don't let people borrow your reputation, right? This is the thing I say to my students the most, and also to my mom. You are letting people spread misinformation by using your credibility. Do you want that? Like, is that who you want to be, as an untrustworthy person? I think most of us would say no. So the other thing, and I'll keep this tight, but the other thing that really distinguishes journalists is it's we have to move more slowly than people who are spreading misinformation. It takes longer to verify information. It takes longer to understand information, to really like go through and be like, all right, what is an R naught? Like, how do we understand the spread of coronavirus? The R naught is like how many people you are likely to infect if you are yourself infected. We don't know that number for this illness yet. But it's important to understand things like what makes that number real? How do epidemiologists arrive at this? So it's tempting. Like I tell this to my students, it's embarrassing to look dumb. So one of the risks is the Dunning-Kruger effect is we're so scared of looking stupid that we pretend to be smart, which only makes us look stupider. And it's a massive advantage to be the person who's comfortable asking a question and just saying like, I don't know, what should I know about that? How do you know? Questions are way more powerful than any other tool we have. So that's my advice to my students. That's my advice to other people. The other thing is just journalism is getting weaponized in some interesting ways right now. Like not journalism, but information is getting weaponized. It's being selected very carefully. We are in an environment where the president, and this is not a political statement, the president regularly says things that either have to be walked back or upon fact checking turn out to not to be true. This is super dangerous because how do we make decisions as a society if we don't have good information? And that has nothing to do with politicians you like or don't. It has to do with, do you want your society to work? I really, really want my society to work. I don't want to have armed insurrection in the streets. If I would rather have good journalism than good jiu-jitsu. Because I think it has a wider effect on people. And that is my rant.
So what I'm taking from both of you is that a lot of what it takes to have good journalism is to be a good consumer of journalism, and that requires self-knowledge. It requires being honest with yourself. And I really liked, first of all, the idea of really respecting the complexity of COVID, and also the idea that if you like an idea too much, then maybe that's the one that you should really investigate. So yeah. We're running out of time. I know that both of you are incredibly busy people, and so I wondered if each of you would be willing to give maybe a last statement of something that I didn't ask that you think it's important for people to know, or a final parting thought for people to think about.
Chris, do you have one handy? I know you have to go first.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about sort of what kinds of journalism I found most valuable in this time, and I think it's the thing that has there's two things I've been thinking about. One is that I've been in my career sort of bouncing between local and national a lot, and what this has really taught me is that like we really need both. There's been a lot of movement to try and protect and rebuild local journalism as people have realized that just the big national papers have actually done okay in the past few years, but the locals have really been hit hard. And what I realized with this is that we actually need sort of this interplay between both. Some of the best work I've seen has been like I'm reading the Boston Globe every day, and I'm reading our local papers, and because I live in Boston, we don't really have a paper, I should say, but I'm also reading the Atlantic because they've done amazing work, and the Times and the Post and USA Today. And then the other thing that is that because of the way this story is changing so rapidly, a lot of places have started putting up sort of things that are almost more akin to like wikis, like that are more sort of resource guides. We built one, and I'll send that link around because I should promote some of my own work a little bit. But like that's the kind of thing that has actually been really helpful. Is just like, what is the situation now? Because like the minute by minute stuff is a lot of noise, and it's harder to sort through that minute by minute stuff and know what's relevant than to. And I think that's why these sort of resource guides that people have started creating have been so valuable, because it's like, okay, here's what we know. At the end of the day, this is the stuff that we can at least stand behind, and that is not just, you know, the latest thing that has been tweeted. So I think things that sort of slow us down a little bit end up being the easiest to end up being sort of the best resources. So yeah, slow down, take a breath. It's
Thank you,
hard.
Chris.
It's complex.
It is, and I know you have to jump off. Are you comfortable with giving Betsy the last word?
I am. I'm always comfortable giving Betsy the last word.
Thank you so much for your insight. I really, really appreciate it. And maybe we can continue this conversation, the three of us, at another time.
Would love that.
Yeah.
So,
Fran.
Your turn, Betsy.
To springboard off something that Chris just said, actually, about that we have to slow down. So Mark Twain said, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can get its boots on, right? It is, if you do not have to go through a process of verifying information, you can move a lot faster. And this is a flaw, right? This is an inherent built-in problem in our media system that people just need to recognize. If you're seeing something first and fast, be careful about getting too attached to it. The other thing I just wanted to say is, everybody, you know, the media is not special in this country. Like, the First Amendment applies to absolutely everyone. And Chris and I, a lot of other journalists and I, have a difference of opinion on this. And it's partially because I didn't have the advantage of journalism training when I started. I learned everything on the job. And if I can, I think everyone can. But you have to be interested in that. And you have to be more interested in what's good for other people than you are in advancing your own agenda. And that, I think, is the other thing that really distinguishes journalists, is not just how we work with this discipline of verifying information before we share it, but also, I have not been registered with a political party since I started to vote. I have voted for Republicans and Democrats. I will continue to vote for Republicans and Democrats. I don't have, like, if I had, I'm a Christian, but if I'm being real honest, journalism's my, like, most deeply felt religion. I believe firmly in the fact that the best thing I personally can do for society is ensure that there's a clean media ecosystem that tells everyone's stories, and emphasizes we can't always get to truth, but we can usually get to facts that are verifiable and data. And I take that responsibility really seriously. I have recently gone on an unfriending spree of folks on Facebook in the jiu-jitsu community who sincerely believe that the media, by which I interpret them to mean professional journalists, are pushing some agenda. And when I chime into those conversations, I get a lot of this: "Oh, not you, you're one of the good ones." And the fact is, I'm not exceptional or special. I'm not different from my colleagues. I am very much here today, and thank you for inviting me, Val, because I wanted to say, you know, it is actually disgusting to me, like, so utterly offensive to me, to think of presenting my personal agenda to other people and presenting it as accurate information. So, and that's true for most journalists. So one thing that I think would really help us clean up our ecosystem is to acknowledge, like, most people who are working professionally as journalists are not pushing an agenda, but we have to distinguish between analysis and commentary and news reporting, which is very confusing in our ecosystem because of some laws that changed in the 90s about what could be broadcast on television and radio. I can get into that sometime, but the gist is, look for labels on your content always. If it says analysis, if it says op-ed, if it has any sort of cutesy headline, assume that that is opinion work that is meant to enhance reporting. And there may be reported information in it, but it's very important to distinguish between information and opinion. And that's a skill that Americans are demonstrably pretty bad at. And if everyone worked a little bit harder on that, I think that we could both lower the emotional tenor of some of the really nastier debates that we're having, and also really understand where to go to look for news, just news. And I'm sorry it's so messy. Like, I really am. And if people would like to reach out for some advice about how to sort through the noise to get to good information, I am very happy to. I have a lot of resources. I'm very happy to share that. And I hope people will reach out to me. I'm easy to find. It's Betsy at Bellingham BJJ, BETSY.
I love that. Thank you so much for that offer. And maybe that's something that, like I mentioned, the three of us could go into more detail in on another chat. The idea of, okay, we know what we need to do based on your experiences, and now you can share with us how we do what we need to do in order to be educated consumers of journalism, of facts, of information. That would be great.
I'd be thrilled. The more of us that are participating in this from lots of different perspectives, the better our information economy is going to be.
So we need to think of a well, I almost said cutesy, but it can't be cutesy, but we need to think of a name for our sequel conversation. So we'll think about that in the meantime. But Betsy O'Donnell, thank you so much for your insights and for chatting with me today. I appreciate it.
I'm so pleased to be with you. Thank you for doing this whole series. I've been enjoying it with a lot of interest.
Oh, I'm glad.